Whoa, Balana. So great to be surrounded by family and friends. So good to see you all here. I'll start by acknowledging the people and the place. So the dancers, Nyunga Wadjuk people, other Aboriginal people from other parts of the country, and everyone who's here today, and those who are live streaming, I believe, through YouTube. Also acknowledging Diva Muir, my wife, in the audience, and other family and friends, so there's some Wangais and Nyungas and different people that I know. So a bit about me, just a rough intro. I'm wearing my t-shirt from the Mundaredi determination area. I'm currently at the national level doing some work around First Nations Heritage Protection Alliance, which I won't talk too much about, apart from saying that the events of Jukan coming from Western Australia has sent a reverberation around the nation and around the world about an expectation of how do we actually protect, manage and celebrate both the intangible and the tangible heritage and culture that we enjoy as a special inheritance and privilege in this country. So through that process, seeking legislative reform and other mechanisms to ensure that heritage and culture is protected and celebrated. Also, in that role, I'm also chair of the National Native Title Council, which we will talk a bit more about in terms of the impacts of land restitution and the importance of property in the creation of wealth and value. And of course, in my own country, native title holder, both within the Jewel and the Mundaredi, and more broadly in other places like Bidilibro and Mardu and other parts of the desert, which we'll see some slides on that as well. And of course, I do sort of have to fund a lot of this stuff by running and operating a business. So, otherwise, I'd be locked up in a 9 to 5 somewhere, which I'm a very bad employee. So, that's the country that I come from. The little red dot, like, where do you come from? Okay, Western Australia. My mob are pretty much in the middle, the geographic heart of Western Australia. This bit of country, Mundaredi, is probably 200 kilometres east of the geographic centre of Western Australia. And we're one of the Mandjiljarra speakers, Mandjiljarra Nation. Special acknowledgement to the other Mandjiljarra families who've just had the determination in the Billa Nature Reserve last week. And I thought I saw Mr. Odell, who was the Principal Legal Officer at Central Desert Native Title Services, who helps facilitate and makes that happen. So yeah, that's where I'm from. I'll just start now diving into it. So First Nations in Australia. Between 1788 to 1901, we had an estimated 3 million Aboriginal people living in Australia. In that 113 years, the population went from 3 million down to 100,000. That's the impact of colonisation, imperialism, wealth extraction, all of those forces. Some of us were recipients of that, and that's where a lot of First Nations, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today, marginalised, dispossessed, excluded. Some of us are beneficiaries. Well, all of us are beneficiaries of this process as well, because we're all sitting in an institution which is part of the wealth of this state that has emerged from the ashes of Noongar Whadjuk people. So I have this slide here just to show a couple of things. One is, of course, the many First Nations and languages. So there were estimated 500 languages spoken. Of that, only 20 remain. Australian languages, not the medium that I'm communicating with you now, which is the imported English language. So this intergenerational trauma continues to affect and impact not only First Nations, Aboriginal people, but the entire society. We're all still emerging and trying to deal with that trauma at the same time as go about our daily lives, breathe the air, drink the water, eat the food, and the reverse of what happens when you need to expel that. All right, so into the talk. That's just a framing to understand where we're at, and we're not alone in that, because where we are, you know, we all get busy on the ground here, but we're part of a world, we're part of a globe, we're part of these forces that were at play, and we're just the inheritors of European imperialism. It's not like the Europeans invented imperialism. There's some other parts of the world that also did it, and I don't know, maybe it's the nature of man to try and go out there and tell other people what to do and make them do things to benefit themselves. Okay, so the basic thesis of this talk is that around wealth creation. So it's quite a simple thesis. We're participating in an economy built from the age of European imperialism. And that age and that process of imperialism, there are three key elements to that. Extract. There's an emerging discipline at the moment called extractivism, which looks at the extraction of resources, minerals, plants. You know, we're all eating a diet today based on resources that were extracted from South America, potatoes, tomatoes, all those different foods that we consume today are part of that extractivism. The exploitation of peoples. So this is one of the interesting things about, and in the next slide we'll talk about it, but one of the things about if you're going into a society that has all its needs met, how do you get them to do what you want them to do and not continue to do what they're doing? And that's what the exercise of disruption, whether it's massacring, whether it's taking the kids away, whether it's colonising the mind through names. Each of us carries a name. I don't have a Christian name. I have my Aboriginal names and a futuristic name that my father had invented. But all of those things, it's that sort of dynamics of the relationship. And so how do they do that is through this idea of discovery. And in the records of this institution, you'll have old maps, explorers' journals, all those sort of things. Discovery. Mr. Collard talked about place names. Once you discover, it's part of that conquest. So wiping the slate clean and trying to rebuild something with all the remnants of what you've destroyed. And then the pacification. Keep this pacification in mind, because that's what we're participating in at the moment. the institutions that we have is part of pacifying us. And the other thing is, it's not about black and white. There's class. There's who are the beneficiaries? Where does the flow of the benefit go? The ultimate benefit, the ultimate gain. And that's just one of the, a headline thing. In going into India, the British extracted 45 trillion pounds of wealth from India. Okay, so that leaves the current nation of India, which is rebuilding, but left them for a long time in poverty. And all of that wealth was transferred to Europe. I mean, Europe is like a backwater on the appendage of a continent over in some part of the north there somewhere. Somehow they managed to accumulate all this wealth from the centres of civilization in the Middle East, in India, in South America, and funnel it all back and build these institutions that continue to dominate the globe today. And we, as an appendage of Europe, down at the tail end of the global south, are sort of participating and engaging in that same process. So there's a number of philosophers and economic theorists and people like that. One of the main ones, of course, is Adam Smith, who many of you may have heard in The Wealth of Nations. Essentially wrote the textbook on how to go out, organise yourself as a society, extract, exploit, engage in commerce, and create wealth. There's a lot more to it than that in terms of what Adam Smith wrote, but that's the distillation or the summary that I'm working with. There's another economist who, very difficult to find any of his literature, but he wrote this book, The Mystery of Capital, and why capitalism triumphs in the West and fails everywhere else. And I think a lot of his discussion was in two parts. One was looking at the First World and the Second World, being the former communist countries, and then the Third World. The First World, which is the West, set out and integrated a formal property system. So a lot of us, you're all living in houses, you're living in titles. There's the Torrens system of titles. That basically took, digress a little bit, because I don't have notes and I can do that. Digress a little bit. You go to, we all know about Robin Hood, King John, Prince John, sorry. During the Crusades, when the knights went off to battle, they had to, when they got their title deeds to land, that was it. You had to physically control that title deed that you got from the king. And what they did was set up this system of trusts. Someone you trust who will look after your title deed when you're off waging the war against the infidels. And everybody recognises this term trust today, because everyone's got a family trust or a charitable trust or some other form of trust. But you delve back down and look at, where do these ideas come from? Trusts was one. So in the history, you're able to find the nuggets or the gems of where a lot of the ideas that we take for granted today originate from. So I'll come back to De Soto, but basically what he's saying is that in the West, they've organised, they've represented. So the reason I was talking about trusts, it's a representation of an asset that you have. You've all heard things like derivatives and all these mortgages is a representation, a loan. So they're representing and deriving from the value of that asset multiple times. So that's what financiers do. They play with that and we all pay for it. So, it's not like I'm saying, I'm the Aboriginal person that is suffering all of this. What I'd like you to do is peel away the onion layers from your eyes, cry for a while, stop drinking the Kool-Aid, and come to the point of realising that you're getting screwed as much as the blackfellas are. You're just happily getting screwed. We're not. So anyway, that's what is wealth. I'll jump on from that. So understanding wealth, this is a really tricky question. Have you ever asked yourself, what is wealth? Because when you start looking at it, there's all the smoke, there's all these mirrors, there's people will tell you that you can invest in this vehicle and you'll generate wealth, or, there's all these sort of things. What is wealth? And this is a work in progress for me, because I'm looking at it from the perspective of a traditional owner, native title holder, who's fortunately my country, so the 24,000 kilometres of land that we have is exclusive possession native title. We can exclude people from it. In the other country I'm involved in, which is Dual, we have to share it, and share it with conditions that mean that we get marginalised, excluded, etc. And the only way that we can generate wealth from our land is to participate in this process that the government has developed, which is to take land from us and give it to third parties, like miners. And in exchange, we get a transaction fee or rent. And that's, I think, the key idea I want you to go away with today. In the wealth of this state, so, there is a debate between Aboriginal people and the settler state about who actually owns the wealth. But that's essentially we're fighting over these crumbs, because the loaf of bread's over there, taken away by the multinational corporation, the oligarchs, and all of those people. We have oligarchs. They're not only in Russia. I won't name them because they'd probably sue the crap out of me. But we've got some oligarchs living probably about 10 k's down the road over here. They are actual oligarchs. So understanding wealth, there's this, I think the key ideas you need to pick up there is, there's stock, there's flow. So there's stuff that you have, and then the flow is, you've heard of like taking stock take and stuff like that in shops. You're measuring at a point in time what the value is. I won't dwell too much on that apart from you've seen the slide. So coming out of that, there's these 6 forms of capital, right? Human capital, and I know you'll go, oh, what? Distilling people down into capital. But think about it. What is it all about? Everything we're doing is about people. End of the day, there's nothing. We're all here sitting down. We're all people. And we're engaged in hopefully productive activities. So we're producing things. So number 3, physical, produced assets are forms of capital. Intellectual property, the ideas that you generate. The institutions. Having a building like this and a precinct like this is part of the wealth of this state. The natural capital, and that's a tricky one. Just watch that space, because that's where carbon markets and all those sort of things are going on. There's an agenda out there to capitalise nature, create derivatives, create financial tools. So watch that space. And then net foreign assets. This is the one that is the kick in the guts or the teeth for all of us here. In that, I think there was a study I saw in 2010. They talked about mining revenue generating, roughly figures, $60 billion. And $54 billion was exported in the form of dividends and payments overseas. So that's our asset on the land that we give in trust to our government to manage on our behalf, and our government then licenses corporations, individuals, to extract the value from that resource, distributed amongst their stakeholders, their shareholders, their supply chain, etc. And in return, you might get 10 cents in the dollar, if you're lucky, 5 cents in the dollar, back to the people. So I'm not advocating, communism, Marxism and all that. I'm just saying peel the onion off your eyes. So that's our wealth in Western Australia. It's a state run by mining and gas companies. So that might be contentious to say that. And they tell us we're the engine room of Australia. Quite possibly. And these companies provide jobs, wealth and a state surplus. With greatest respect to any politicians in the room, I think you got it wrong. And that's hopefully in ideas generation. I don't have the answers, but there is something wrong when you walk down James Street here and you see people living permanently on the sidewalk. So there's something wrong there. And this is an idea to take away, the captured state. Our state is captured by multinational corporations, by individuals. I mean, we all frown and look at third world countries and go, oh, wow, look at they're overthrowing governments. Kevin Rudd, Prime Minister, was overthrown by multinational corporations here in Australia. And we just thought, oh, yeah, that's really unfortunate. Oh, but, let's get on with cappuccino in the morning. So I'll just run through these slides. They're contentious, but they're happening right now. Major companies haven't paid income tax in 7 years. There's some figures here. 138 billion in income, zero income tax, zero state revenue for these sort of participants. We'll keep going. Don't want to... 11 billion in promised taxes from the gas sector gone missing. So these are headlines right now. That's happening right now. Corporate greed destroying our planet. And, okay, destroying our planet. Our answer? Green capitalism. That's the carbon economies. That's the, a lot of the ESG markets, all that sort of stuff. Now, that's all very well, that's fine, but what is the role? So I'm looking at it from an Indigenous person, a First Nations, Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander person. What's our position in that? Where do we position ourselves? Where does my family situate itself in this emerging economy? Now, in secret, I can tell my mob, if they come and talk to me and listen, how we can actually position ourselves and ensure that our family's wealth is held, protected, maintained and enhanced. But we can't say that too much in public, but there are mechanisms. And you'll get the hint as I go through the slides. The Belia group of professors, I won't ask you, but I'm pretty sure there might be one or two in the room today. Only this week, in the gas debate. So we're a little bit unique in Western Australia in that we had a government that stood up to the gas companies and said, hey, you guys, you're not going to take all the gas and send it all overseas. We want some to stay here. So that's a bit different to the rest of the country. But then, of course, what's the impact of this gas production, greenhouse gas emissions? And so we're setting ourselves up as a state to being a pariah in greenhouse gas production when there are other mechanisms and other ways we can deal with it. So this is all topical issues going on right now today. And the question is, are we comfortable with this? Some of you recognised. Okay. I was trying to blank out to... All right, okay, so there's recognition there. WA Incorporated. So, on a serious note on that, we as Aboriginal people, our cultural heritage, our country, fracking. I mean, fracking. Has anyone ever looked at what fracking does?
Ban fracking.
Yes, ban fracking. Basically, you destroy your water. For what? Short-term gains. And this whole thing about the collusion between the state and industry couldn't be represented more starkly than in what happened with the Aboriginal cultural heritage, or how cultural heritage is managed. The captured state participates in a process of facilitating development. And then it sells the Kool-Aid, you're all going to get jobs from it. When we and Whadjuk Noongar people first bore the brunt of colonisation here in Western Australia, Governor Hutt, and I think it was in 1831 or something like that, 1829 settled, 1831, let's set aside Rottnest Island as now everyone knows it as a prison, but Governor Hutt's comment was, as a training centre. Does that sound familiar to all you blackfellas? You're getting trained all the time? Does it sound familiar? As a training centre, so that we might train them, the Noongar Whadjuk people, in useful skills so that they may participate in our economy. And of course, the impact of the Rottnest Island prison and all those, I've got my mother's stepfather was one of the prisoners. They were all participating, and they actually underwrote the economic development of this state. The salt farms at Rottnest Island is one of the most critical industries in the very early days of this colony. So we bear the brunt, the full force of this colonisation. And nowhere is it more clear as in this statement. The social and economic interests of the state, and including the social and economic benefit of Aboriginal people. That is the decision the minister makes on whether to destroy an Aboriginal site. And our former Minister for Aboriginal Affairs, it's in the Hansard record, was proud of the fact that the state of Western Australia facilitated the destruction of Aboriginal heritage at a 99.9% success rate for industry. Now, this is highly complex and I won't go into the detail of it, but there is something fishy, something rotten in the state of Western Australia. And Festival of Ideas, go away and look at it. So the two key things, stop drinking Kool-Aid, peel the onion layers from your eyes. Right, so on that note, I'll just go into delving down a little bit now into what is wealth in First Nations. I'm proud to come from a hunter-gatherer based economy. In that hunter-gatherer based economy, which is most Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people, but there are people who live on the coast as well, or rivers, they eat fish. I don't know why, but they eat fish. Some of this mob that eat fish, they got some pretty cool little mechanisms in place. So they built things called fish traps. These fish traps, built maybe 20,000 years ago, continue to generate an economic return 20,000 years later. So, we got this whole thing, the mindset that goes, Aboriginal people are so primitive, they didn't invent the wheel. Hello? What's going to pull the wheel in Australia? A kangaroo? It'd be a bumpy ride. The only thing that would pull a wheel in Australia would be another person, up until the introduction of horses and camels and those sort of magnificent beasts. But we did invent aerodynamic tools and weapons. And we also invested heavily in intellectual cultural property. We had time to spare. Salins, an anthropologist, went into this and basically said hunter-gatherer people are one of the original affluent societies. You get into physical anthropology, all of us here, basically we are built to be hunter-gatherers. That's why the gym junkies go off and drink a lot of protein and work out a lot, because we're built to be active. I'm guilty of not doing that, but we're built to be that way as humans. And that's because we are originally hunter-gatherers. Horticulture, farming, have transformed landscapes, transformed intact ecosystems, converted it, resulted in desertification, environmental impact. So that's still happening, and it's only recently that we've gone on that journey. Key point there, go away with, in archaeology they say that agriculture was invented in 3 places in the world about 10,000 years ago. I think, I can't remember that, the river in India, over in Indus, I think, and then there's the Tigris, Euphrates, there's the other place. What's the third one then? Okay, audience? Where's the third place that agriculture was invented? Hey? Very close to here. No. Highlands of Papua New Guinea. Okay? And they're our family. Australia was once one with New Guinea before global warming, so that's another side. We as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, we have the histories of global warming, these environmental impacts. We've still got stories up in the north coast going out into the ocean to places in the Arafura Sea. So we were one of the original affluent societies, consuming like 93% protein. And it's not all meat. So back home where I come from, a lot of the meat is in trees, acacia trees and plants like that. So it was all in the seeds as well. And that's why we have grinding stones all over the outback. So coming back to fish traps, applying an economic metric on it, some people organised themselves 10, 15, 20,000 years ago. They built a fish trap. Then they went away and sat under the tree, made paintings, sang songs, made love, etc. Go back, pull the fish out of the water. And then they did that for 20,000 years. So for an engineering feat, I'm no good at maths, but work out the return on investment. ROI, as they say. So they're the sort of things in terms of our customary wealth and our customary capital. They're the things that we already hold. It's just been, we've got onion layers and Kool-Aid. So one of the methodologies is this guy, De Soto. He set out a process of saying, okay, how do the trillions of dollars of assets that third world countries and people in third worlds live on, how do you convert that into a comparable wealth structure that the Western world has? And in his book, he goes through this process: discovery, a legal and political strategy, commercial strategy and operational strategy. So here I'm probably doing a bit of discovery, doing a bit of political strategy, so communicating these ideas. We also have a legal strategy in the native title process, and I'm talking to you, Mr. Tucker, in the native title process where you secure recognition of your land and then understand and appreciate and value what it is that you hold, and how do you then articulate and engage, negotiate with the world around you. Onto this slide, just giving you a quick snapshot. So when our mob were off, you do a little bit of work here, maintain a site there, you do a ceremony over there to bring back more plants or animals, then you sit down and you engage in the production of cultural capital. That's what Aboriginal people have been doing for thousands and thousands of years. And part of the production of that cultural capital is defined by these complex social relationships. So we live in a social universe of relationships with each other, relationships with the spirit world, relationships with the land, and we maintain that spiritual relationship. It's their family. So it's a kinship-based understanding of the universe. So Tiokorpa, or dreaming, the spirituality, is the core. That's the thing that wraps around it all. Spirit, in terms of emotional well-being, spiritual, all those sort of things, the spirit, confidence. That's the one thing that, confidence is the thing that really sort of makes a difference in how you interact and engage with the rest of the world. So it's a human thing. There's going to be people out there who are going to undermine your confidence because they have something to gain in you not reaching your full potential. And that's a pretty poor, bad sort of way of running your affairs and living life, but that's what happens. So land is ngorora. Ngabajika is this process of exchange. This is the core to our economic system. Ngabajika. Now, a lot of these things get lost in translation when it's translated into English. Kunda is one of those. Kunda, a lot of people, Aboriginal people in the room would know that term as shame. But it's not shame. Kunda is not shame. Kunda is respect. If you have no kunda, then there's shame. If you behave in a way without kunda, there's shame. But it's respect and maintaining respectful relationships. We had one of the oldest, we have one of the oldest mines in Australia, in the world. Some of you might have heard of Wilgie-Mia. It's 20,000 years old. And people still do use products from there for ceremonies. But the process of extraction from there is a balancing act. You give back. And when settlers first arrived there, they found artefacts and all this stuff in Wilgie-Mia that was the replacement, the rebalancing of the relationship of extraction. So Kanyera is keeping, and Nyamiri is that relationships. That's the skin groups, we call it skin groups, but it extends not only from each individual, it can extend into the spiritual world, into the physical world and elsewhere. So that's just a little snapshot. I won't get you to exercise too much thought on that because it's highly complex, but this is the life that we live. This is our cultural inheritance. That's what we bring as part of our customary capital. So just running down now into giving you some little infographics. So Fred Myers is another anthropologist, and he talks about land ownership is not a special kind of property. This is for Aboriginal people. It's not a special set of rights defining relationships to an ecologically necessary living space. Instead, it's one form of objectifying social relationships of a shared identity. So social relationships that we share. And that's something that I got excited once. So I heard this idea of the sharing economy. Anyone heard that? I went, wow, there's a breakthrough. Finally, whitefellas are going to get it. And then you find, sharing economy is Uber. Okay, that's not quite what I thought, what my definition of what a sharing economy was. A sharing economy is one where you basically have structured relationships so that no one goes without. Everyone, everyone has to pull their weight, clearly, but you go through a process of a structured exchange and reciprocity. I give you this, you give that person that, the pay it forward methodology. But it's not paid forward linearly, it's paid around and around and around. And that's what Aboriginal economies are based on. That's why the 100,000 people in 1901 have clawed our way back up to just short of a million, I think, today. But we have survived on you drawing on these principles of customary capital to ensure that our families can survive against the marginalisation, the oppression, and all of those institutional structures that repress us. So this is happening right now. This is an interesting slide. It'll give you an idea of what happened. Black Australia in 1788 got turned into white Australia in 1965. Stark, in the detail in the black there is all the First Nations and all of that. Chopped up into these little blocks with great imaginative names like Western Australia. Wow, how exciting is that? How inspiring is that name? Western Australia. West of where? Okay. Then come through in 1993, Aboriginal people have been campaigning, land rights, treaty, all these public engagements. And you see land getting returned to Aboriginal people. 2013, with the advent of native title, it's starting to emerge that Aboriginal people are starting to reclaim a lot of these lands. The thing is, what we are doing, and this is the thing that most Australians don't appreciate, they think, oh, that's all the blackfellas stirring up trouble. What we're doing is we're holding your government to account. We're articulating and defining the type of society we want to live in, and we're wearing out our rubber on our boots doing it. And if you're doing a festival of ideas, what are you doing as a citizen of this country to create the type of society you want to live in? Give you a quick hint, some of you might not like this. There's a monarch who's well into her 90s now. She's your boss. You're not citizens, you're all subjects. So at some point we're going to have a conversation about the Australian Republic. What kind of conversation is that? We can't elect Shane Warne. What kind of republic are we going to have? What kind of constitution are we going to have? The rules that set it out. That's a great conversation. That's something, we could start generating. And I would contribute that working with these guys, see the grey and all of that. Basically, Aboriginal people are reclaiming and taking back. So we either own, manage, or have a say over 80 to 90% of Australia today. And we're doing that as our custodianship, as part of these protocols. But at some point, we're going to have a conversation about the new Australian Republic. How does the settler state work with the First Nations? That may be another disrupted festival idea. But anyway, so that's just giving you a snapshot of what's going on. There are some people, and I'll do a shout out to the Budimaya people in Western Australia, who were quite unfortunate in having their native title claim for determination. The determination said that native title does not exist. The key here is they are still Budimaya people. They still hold their customary capital, their sovereignty, their identity to their country. All that's happened is white Australia says, oh no, Budimaya, we don't recognise you. That's all that's happened. And then the question is, what are you as white Australians, do you support that? Do you support the fact that your government, your legal institutions, all of those things that are part of your wealth, support this narrative that Budimaya people do not have a connection to their country? That's just an idea to chuck out there. Budimaya people, for those who don't know, live up in the Midwest, Mount Magnet, that part of the world, Lake Moore, that part of the world. And presumptuous of me to speak for them, but I thought, given I've got a stage and native title does not exist, I'll just chuck it in there. So how do we compare? Coming back to that idea of the forms of capital, there is a, as native title holders build up their social infrastructure, we're starting to design these matrices, sustainability frameworks. So in a native title determination, so this is the thing, this is what Aboriginal people are saying to the state government and to the people of Western Australia. We can work in partnership with you. We're the front line. We're at the point at which industry is taking our land and government is taking our land and giving it to industry. We can have agreements to keep that wealth back on country. And that's what we're doing. We're actually, a lot of the employment arrangements means that our people are employed. They're generating money that they then spend at the local shops. So there needs to be a maturity in the conversation with industry, with government, and with native title holders and the people of Western Australia on how do we position ourselves and define ourselves in relation to the world. So that's just a table showing, if you can start, and I won't go into it, but if you can start looking at the ways in which we manage and handle these forms of capital in our interactions. So that's, a little bit of complex sort of stuff that we're working with at the moment, but it's, keep an eye on the Goldfields region. As we get our native title determinations settled, there's going to be some interesting relationships formed out there. So exciting or interesting times ahead, so borrowing on the Chinese phrase of may you live in interesting times. And we are the state of excitement, apparently. I don't know whether we're in a state of excitement or we are. But there are things that are going on. Climate change, financial sector expectations, ESG, that's the environment, social, governance structures, which are basically, this is a runaway train. The financial boys are actually running in and trying to define what that means. It's up to civil society, it's up to people who are interested to get out there and determine what the definitions are and how does that translate into practical implications for all of us in the society that we want to live in. So there are new social, political and economic relationships. I mean, windmills are popping up everywhere, for instance. One of my old aunties said, we're going to be like Holland. We're going to have windmills everywhere. And mustn't lose sight of, the things like closing the gap, the Millennium Development Goals, those sort of things. How does the extraction of wealth from Western Australia result in meeting and satisfying and looking after the people? Because that's what we do. We give the miners, we give the resource developers basically a sacred privilege of generating wealth from the resources in the land. They'll give you 1 cent in the dollar through a foundation to invest in maybe, I don't know, any miners sponsoring this event? I'm not sure. But they'll do that. And they'll give some people some jobs and some training, but they're going to automate that soon. So, there's a whole discussion that needs to happen in the world. And one of the fundamental ways in which you guide that is just take that little image back. Equality versus equity. You can create equality, but as you can see with that image, you won't be able to enjoy it. But if you come from the view of equity, everyone gets an opportunity. Everybody gets included, everyone has an opportunity to be included, and we recognise that there is diversity. So the call to action, we need a new narrative, tell stories, understand history. That's where we're at the moment. Hopefully I've inspired, or you can be inspired. One of the things I love doing, follow the money trail. Money never lies, just everybody around it lies. And they will tell you the story they want you to know, but if you follow the money trail, you'll find the truth. The connections, connecting with spirit, connecting with sustainability aspirations, connecting with people, to build and enhance these connections. Defend it. So as native title holders, we are defending our country. But we're doing it alone at the moment because everyone else thinks we're greedy and we're trying to grab all the wealth and resources that they think they benefit from. So there's an opportunity to connect with custodians and take that idea of protecting our wealth. Apparently there was opportunity for questions, but... Or have I gone over? Yep.
Very inspirational, Kado, and it's interesting, what you're saying, that, the economy of our country has to respect our Aboriginality. But what I want to ask you is, the Australian identity is one thing that it's starting to grapple with, and our heritage is on the other side of that. When does those two connect about looking after this country? And how can we make sure that it stays in that sort of philosophy that the Australian identity connects with our heritage, so that we can look after this country together? You thought about that?
Good question. So when do we get to that point? And I would say we are on that journey. We're getting there. So we're having welcomes to country. We're having these performances. We're having that opportunity to participate. I think we just got to start thinking a little bit deeper and bring some intellectual capital. So think about these ideas of capital. What's the capital you bring into it? But where do you want to go also? So do we want a segregated society? Do we want an inclusive society? Do we want to celebrate diversity? Do we want to make everyone look the same, feel the same, be the same? So they're all the big questions. And, there are people out there actively trying to set that agenda, but it's up to people to actually respond and, do something about it.
Yeah, I just found it interesting when you're talking about the natural history and the mines and that sort of thing. Is that, it got me thinking about how in France the Notre Dame cathedral burnt down, and it was, they could actually replace that. But what we don't actually realise is that we've got all this natural history in Australia, and when that was blown up, we can't just recreate that same natural history again. And yet when a cathedral France gets burnt down, oh no, there's a big, everyone's jumping up and down about it and fundraising to get that restored. And we've got so much great history in Australia, but because it's natural history, doesn't seem to be as much importance placed on that.
No, that's absolutely the point. There's this whole discussion around intangible and tangible heritage. And so that's one level. The other level is heritage is being run in a development approvals process. So that's our interaction with it, because it's all about, heritage is an impediment to development. We want to be able to extract these resources. Whereas we should be, let's celebrate that heritage. Let's look at the fact that Juukan caves, 40,000 years old, I think it was 4,000 years worth of direct connection to the current traditional owners in the DNA. 4,000 years ago, that's when they were building pyramids. So we were engaged, all this culture that we hold in Australia come from way, way, way before, and it continues to be relevant and part of the life of people today. So that's the thing. If you want to disrupt, flip it on its head. Let's start celebrating Aboriginal culture, take it out of the development approvals process, invest in our songlines, invest in our stories, invest in the opportunity to come together to actually participate in the cultural capital and the knowledge creation that we engage in. There are ways in which we did it traditionally, and that's what needs to be supported, is Aboriginal people, Aboriginal elders supported to pass on their knowledge in their way and to who they determine. So, yeah, thank you for that.
Thank you, Kado. Lovely stuff. The slide that I loved up there, or the bit I liked out of the last one, was the connect and sustainability stuff. And sustainability to me is livability. And that's what blackfellas always had. So how do we compare the differences between whitefella sustainability and maybe real sustainability, which seem to focus around the difference between culture and economy to me?
Yeah, was it you just said that it's about living? You know, it's how do you actually live? And how do you actually follow the money? That's what it's all about. When you start following the money, you'll see that there's someone out there who's going to benefit from undermining the value or, you know, what you have. So there's no easy answer to it, but if you just follow that money trail to see who's actually benefiting through it, and how can you actually make sure that the benefit is distributed properly to everyone who should share in it. So access and benefit sharing, which, you know, they sound like United Nations principles, because they are, but we don't actually practice it, the access and the benefit sharing.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Thank you for speaking truth to power. It's always lovely to hear that. And I wondered if you're familiar with David Graeber and David Wengrow's new book called The Dawn of Everything, which is terribly relevant to the dominant narrative being destroyed and replaced by a better one. In other words, they're archaeologists and anthropologists who show that the origin stories, which are still dominant here, you know, the stupid savage, shall we say, and all that ramifications from that, are questioned by recent anthropological research, which shows that our ancestors were smart and intelligent in some of the ways in which you indicated for Aboriginal people. But across the world for thousands of years, they have been smart, intelligent, wise, imaginative. So getting rid of that thought might help to change the dominant narrative which we're still imprisoned with.
Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, I'll take that as a comment, yeah.
Hi, Kado. Some of the stuff that you've talked about today has been really important conceptually in how we get guided through this whole transition that we need to get through in so many different ways. And I wonder how you go getting a hearing at a state government or a federal government level on a regular basis.
I mean, you've got to look at it as their parties. So basically, without giving away strategies and stuff like that, but you look at what the pressure points are. And one of the big pressure points at the moment is the guys who are making money are realising that if the products that are being produced are done unethically or unsustainably, people are not going to buy it. And so the conversation, the role of government often is to come along and regulate it, create a safe space, but it's really for us as people to go about and engaging in our activities and creating the society that we want to live in. So that's the other thing, the other message go home with, is government is not the answer. It's the imagination and the inspiration of people to actually engage and work together to create things And then we can go to government and say, hey, look, this is what we've worked out. We expect you, as our representative, that's the other thing, they're our representatives. So they work for us. And so, yeah, so there are techniques and methods, but it's really about that. You know, it's about us getting together and becoming activated and engaged and be creative. Yeah, so thank you. There's one down here.
Kado, how do you stop people making money out of other people and using them as a resource, even in the name of greenwashing?
Oh my goodness. I think the answer is people need to peel those onion layers off. That's what it boils down to, because, and you know, if you smell a rat, it probably is a rat. And then, of course, how do you respond to that? And I suppose that's the, let's take it back to our position as Aboriginal people, native title holders. The wet ink on a piece of paper, you may end up with a signature. How much is that signature worth in transactions down the value chain? And that's the thing that people need to be aware of. Don't sign anything until you've satisfied yourself that you know or understand what's going on. And it's also and I'm talking to Aboriginal people in the audience, but your advisors, you need to get your advisors educated so that they can give you the best advice. So yeah, it's complex, but somebody's going to want to make money out of somebody somewhere. For whatever, yeah.
Hi, Kado. You talked about the native title determinations, that there's more and more of them around Australia. I was wondering if you think that the native title system and the agreement making that triggers, if that's one of the key means to going forward and kind of realising these benefits you're talking about.
Yeah. No, well, first of all, I'm not deluded. So I know that the Native Title Act is simply a risk management mechanism for the state to manage risk for the corporates, the resource developers. And that's what they're doing. They're setting up a framework to manage that risk so that they can continue to take our land away and give it to someone else. In that transaction and in that exchange, we claw back as much as we can in terms of benefits, conditions, and addressing basic bottom line stuff that's never been addressed by government. So there's some people, they're funding dialysis, they're funding health, they're funding education, they're funding housing, which seems to me to be, there's entire ministries developed to, set up to do these things. But there are Aboriginal native title holders who are actually saying, we want to look after our people, and in this transaction, this exchange, this is where we will invest our money. What we've got to do, though, is leverage that and say, OK, we'll come back and negotiate with the government and say, OK, we're investing here, what are you going to do? Because at the moment, every year, you get a closing the gap report, you get a reconciliation report. Little steps, but it's often, by the time you move that far, the issue's grown that much bigger. Yeah. I don't know if that helps, but yeah. Okay, so that's getting a... Have you got a helicopter for me? Oh, cool. I'm going to go and catch a helicopter, folks. All right, thank you.